Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, members. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Mark Evans and I'll be chairing the meeting. Before we start, just to remind you that this meeting is being recorded and by your presence here, you consent to that process. And to remind you that anything you say will be immediately available in the public domain. So I've introduced myself, and on my left is
Hardik Sharma, the planning solicitor for the council.
Helen Bembo, Development Management Team Manager.
Tom Nutt, Assistant Team Manager.
Amanda Willis, Technical Support Team.
Thank you, officers. So item number 1 is minutes of the last meeting, and the amendment has been highlighted to me. Councillor Burnett, who was shown as attending, was in fact an apology, so that can be amended. And so I'll put to you, members, that if you were present at the meeting and deem them a true and correct with the record of what then and there took place, please signify. Thank you, members. Item 2 is apologies. Thank you. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Members, any declarations of interest? Thank you, members. Item 4, we'll move on to the determination of planning applications. And the first one is application 23009664, full land at Auden Hall Farm, Flash Lane, Auden. And I understand it's Tommy you are presenting the.
Yes, thank you. You have to bear with me. It's quite a long one, this. So the site is land at Orton Hall Farm, Flash Lane, Orton. The application site comprises an open area of land accessed from Flash Lane, approximately 1.5 miles from Wombourne. The site contains shallow areas of excavation undertaken in preparation for building works in association with a previous permission to convert a disused cattle shed to a dwelling. The cattle shed has now been demolished and the site is now open, albeit enclosed by temporary fencing. Planning permission is sought for the erection of one dwelling. The proposed dwelling will be the same size as previously approved, but is a new building rather than a conversion, as the former cattle shed with approval for conversion has been demolished. Relevant principles in assessing this proposal are whether or not the proposal directs development to an accessible and sustainable location, or whether the proposal is acceptable with the green belt. With regard to delivering housing in the most sustainable locations, Core Policy 1 directs growth to the most accessible and sustainable locations in the district, which are the main service villages. The application site is not within a main service village or any other form of settlement identified within the core strategy, and is physically and functionally separate from the nearest main service village of Wombourne. As a result, future occupiers of the dwelling would be reliant on the use of a private car to access everyday facilities and services. This conflicts with the main aim of Core Policy 1, which directs development to the most accessible and sustainable locations. The proposed dwelling would be within the Greenbelt. The fundamental aim of Greenbelt policy is to prevent urban sprawl by keeping land permanently open and also to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. A new dwelling here on open land within the countryside would conflict with these aims and would therefore be inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. The proposed dwelling would have a moderate impact on the openness of the Greenbelt, as it would result in built form where there currently is none. And it would also extend built form outwards rather than being within a cluster of existing built form. The harm to the Greenbelt, through its inappropriateness and moderate harm to the openness of the Greenbelt, must be given substantial weight in decision making. This harm must clearly be outweighed by other considerations to justify very special circumstances. The case for very special circumstances has been put forward by the applicant. The first is that the proposed dwelling will be identical to the dwelling previously approved. However, the previous approval cannot be implemented as it was for the conversion of a building that no longer exists. This proposal must be assessed on the site as it is now, which is an open site devoid of buildings. The result is consideration does not carry weight in the planning balance. The second is that the site is currently unsightly and has a harmful visual impact. The site is currently unsightly as it is a building site where the land has been excavated in preparation for building a new dwelling. That work has stopped pending the outcome of this application, and therefore the current condition of the site is considered temporary and not a valid fallback to compare to this proposal. Demolished materials comprise bricks which have been retained on site, and these could be used to rebuild the courtyard boundary to the collection of converted barns adjacent to the site. A proposal for which planning consent is unlikely to be required. As a result, the current state of the site is given limited weight, as the site is unlikely to remain as a building site. Third point is that the effects of the application would be a significant positive impact on a non-designated heritage asset. Council's heritage officer has commented that the loss of the cattle shed has had a detrimental impact on the character and legibility of the site. This is because the walls of the cattle shed formed a continuous boundary to the cluster of converted barns that were part of the historic fabric of the wider site. However, it is unclear how much of this historic fabric could be reused. It is also considered that any reused materials would form a minor reference to the previous layout and historic high wall boundary. As a result, the heritage benefits of the scheme are given limited weight. Should permission be refused, there is an opportunity to use the original bricks to rebuild the courtyard boundary to the existing buildings and parking area, which would have a greater positive impact on the wider heritage value of the site than the proposed dwelling. There would also be a lesser impact on the openness of the greenbelt. It is considered that there would be greater than theoretical possibility that this would occur, and therefore this potential benefit to the character of the site is given some weight. Final point in the very special circumstances case is that the cattle shed was demolished inadvertently due to misunderstanding by the applicant's advisors. This cannot be afforded weight in the planning balance, as this proposal must be considered in the context of the construction of a new dwelling and assessed against the relevant policies accordingly. At this point, it is necessary to emphasise that the approval for the conversion of the former barn was only granted on the basis that it was capable of conversion. The inspector in the appeal decision notes verbatim that it is reasonable to consider the former barn is a building that is able to be altered and extended as allowed for in policy GB1 and the framework, as opposed to being demolished and replaced or rebuilt. The fact that the cattle shed building is not present is the in-principle difference between the previous approval, which is appropriate development in Greenbelt, and this current proposal, which is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. This consideration should be afforded significant weight. Regards to layout, design and appearance, the remnants of the cattle shed walls would be reused, but this would be limited, and overall its former use would be largely disguised, contrary to the guidance set out in the Council's design SPD. As a result, it's considered that the proposal would adversely impact the moral character of the site and wider area, contrary to core strategy policy EQ11 and the design guide SPD. The proposal provides sufficient parking and is unlikely to cause highway safety issues that will not harm neighbour amenity, ecology or trees subject to conditions. In conclusion, proposed development is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. This is by definition harmful to the openness of the Greenbelt. It would also create a moderate level of visual and spatial harm to the openness of the Greenbelt and cause direct conflict with the purpose of safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. This harm shall be attributed substantial weight in the plan balance. In addition to Greenbelt harm, there is harm by way of the proposal being within an unsustainable location and adversely impacting the rural character of the area. The applicant has advanced a number of considerations by way of very special circumstances. Full consideration has been given to the case presented by the applicants. However, these have either no weight, limited weight, or in the case of the reuse of bricks, some weight in the planning balance. No material considerations exist that would justify a decision otherwise than in accordance with the development plan. For the reasons above, it is not considered that these considerations clearly outweigh the substantial weight that must be attached to the Greenbelt harm and other harm identified in this report. Taking the above into consideration, the officer recommendation is to refuse. Thank you. Go through the pictures. Yeah, sorry, I thought they were already up. As you can see there, there's the location plan, the site plan. On the left. On the left, you can show that there's the obviously the empty sites. Then on the right-hand side, you've got the proposed dwelling. That's just showing the elevations of the proposed dwelling.
these are the site photos, some recent site photos showing the site as it is at the moment. So you can see there the site's been excavated to begin the building work for dwelling. And there's the views along Flash Lane to the site there. You can see on the left-hand side, that's the end of where the high wall is, and that part onwards has been demolished. And that's a view looking north, just across the site to the former farm buildings in the distance there. And on the right-hand side, that's sort of the same view, but from 2022. As you can see there, that's the sort of remnants of the cattle shed, or the walls of the cattle shed, and you can see the gable ends there as well. The roof, I think, went some years ago. And that's the final photo, just showing the view north along Flash Lane, and you can see the sites on the right-hand side there.
Okay, yeah, sorry, thank you, Tom. I now call, we have two speakers on this application. So I now call on Ronnie Chambers-Towers, and Madam, it's 3 minutes, and I will be quite strict on that, thank you.
This application seeks consent to erect a dwelling. Planning permission had previously been granted to convert an historic barn on the land to a dwelling. The approved plans gave consent for a significant amount of demolition, including replacement of the majority of one of the walls with glass. Unfortunately, through no fault of the applicants, the barn was inadvertently demolished. This application seeks consent to build the barn exactly as it would have appeared if it had been converted. The original materials remain on site and can be reused. Granting consent to rebuild the barn makes complete sense. It will allow a dwelling to be built where consent had previously been granted for one, which is identical to the previously approved building. Granting consent will also enhance a currently untidy and vacant site. Perhaps most importantly, it will enable the rebuilding of a barn of historic importance. The Conservation Officer supports the proposal, saying that the former barn was associated with Orton Hall Farm, and the retention of materials will allow the historic fabric to remain on site. The former barn and associated buildings are of local historical significance and within the setting of the Grade 2 listed White Cross House. The loss of the barn had a detrimental impact upon the character and legibility of the historic site, and the reinstatement of the building, as per the previously approved plans, will allow the re-establishment of the site. The Conservation Officer is happy for planning permission to be granted, subject to a condition requiring all external materials to be approved by the Council. There are no objections to the application from other consultees, such as highways, or from any locals. There are supporting comments from neighbours who are keen to see the site tidied up with a high-quality dwelling. Councillor Kinsey is also in support. Whilst the site is within the open countryside for planning policy purposes, it is not isolated. It is within the settlement of Orton and close to Womben. The site is within the Green Belt, and whilst local and national planning policies strictly control development, there is not an absolute bar on development in the Green Belt. The National Planning Policy Framework says that development can be permitted in very special circumstances. It is considered that the harm caused by this proposal to the Green Belt would be limited, and that the harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations, including the significant heritage benefits of reinstating the historic farmstead. It is submitted that this should be given significant weight in the balance. As the Council is well aware, historically important buildings are a finite resource, and where there is opportunity for reinstatement, then those opportunities should be taken. Granting consent will, as the Heritage Officer says, undo the harm caused to the character and legibility of the site by the demolition of the building, and will re-establish the historic site. It is therefore submitted that the Conservation Officer's view should be adopted and planning permission should be granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, and thank you very much for staying within the 3 minute time. The application sits on Womber North. The ward councillor for this application is Councillor Kinsey. Wishes to speak, but he's been called to an engagement in London. So I'm going to ask Helen Bembo to read out Councillor Kinsey's submissions. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a submission of Councillor Kinsey, which I'm reading out on his behalf. Good evening, Chairman and members. I am sorry I cannot be with you to present my argument in person this evening, but I am on duty representing our district. Members, this site has developed a complicated history. When initially refused in 2021, the Planning Inspectorate saw nothing wrong with it and approved the transformation of a dilapidated former cowshed into a dwelling. It has always been my opinion this was a positive development for the site. The loss of the original wall has been regretted by the applicants themselves, who never sought this outcome. In fact, the wall being demolished, they retained the bricks specifically to ensure the material fabric of the building be put back and remain central to their plan in accordance with the given permission. The bricks have been diligently stored on site. I wish the same care had been taken when other historic buildings have been demolished. It appears by the Heritage Officer's statement that the historic nature of this building and of the adjoining property of Orton Hall Farm, it is agreed it is part of the historic fabric of the wider site, paragraph 4.2.19, that reinstatement is highly desirable from a heritage perspective. It could even be argued, as implied in paragraph 4.2.19, that it forms part of the curtilage of the wider site. So impact of the loss should carry significant weight. The barn itself dates back to the 1740s, with this location being home to the oldest known remains building in the parish of Wombourne, being noted in the Domesday Book of 1086. This surely deals with the sustainability issue, given at least 950 years of occupation, along with the fact the proposed dwelling would make no additional demands on infrastructure. Therefore, members might choose to demand reinstatement of this historic fabric for the more meaningful preservation of the entire site, in accordance with the prior permission, just as they did so strongly for that of the Crooked House. The applicants have never been happy with the loss and have always wanted to correct the error. Please allow them to do so. Finally, I would like to address the issue of very special circumstances, albeit flippantly. This application is to build in the Greenbelt. The proposal attracts no objection from local residents or councillors, and in fact receives considerable support at multiple points throughout its history, including from elected members, adjoining neighbours, and from professional officers of this council. There is no objection from any of the key stakeholders. Given where we have been with the local plan, I ask if this application raises no objections at all, and even such support, what about it isn't a very special circumstance? Please enforce the reinstatement of our heritage in this location and support this limited and architecturally sensitive dwelling that will secure and enhance historic rural setting. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Ellen. So members, you've heard the applications presented by Tom, and you've heard the agent speaking in favour of it, and a submission from Councillor Kinsey. I'll now throw it open to you, members, to ask questions of the officer, to make any comments or observations of your own, members. Councillor Davies.
Thanks, Chairman. I've read the document. I've read Councillor Kinsey's statement. I heard the statement again tonight, and the statement from the young lady there. And I think we're dancing on the head of a pin, quite honestly, to argue against it. The conservation officer has no objection. They're going to use the old bricks for to full extent. So I just firmly believe that this should be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Any other members?
Thank you, Chair. When the council officers were reviewing this, were there any potential conditions that were explored? First question. And then the second question is, if this application was to potentially be approved, does that risk other applications in the past where we've rejected and set a precedent that would be harder for the council to defend?
Helen?
Thank you. Yeah, through you, Chair. Just listening to both members, and I'll answer your questions directly. I just think I need to come in at this juncture. It's really important here that the nuance is understood about the application process that we're dealing with this evening and this application that is before you and what's happened with the history on the site. The previous approval related to the conversion of a building. Now, as all members are well aware, in 80% Greenbelt, that is an acceptable development. So before committee, we have these on a regular basis where we look at conversions and appropriately sized extensions, and they are considered through the NPPF, the national standard, and through local policy, acceptable development in the Greenbelt. Once a building is removed and is completely not there and is void of that fallback position, we are in inappropriate development territory. That is the key difference here. So if we, to answer your question, Councillor Harper-Wallis, if we were minded to approve this tonight, I am very aware we always sit here and say each case on its own merits, but there is such a strength of in principle issue here that it can't be tiptoed around. If we grant approval for a conversion and then the building comes down, are we going to roll that out across the district to say then that it's acceptable? There's a high bar when it comes to conversion of existing buildings. The applicants went through this with the first application to be able to demonstrate through structural survey that it was capable of being converted. So in answer to your question, yes, there is a dangerous precedent in my opinion here, because we're not talking about technical detail where we can balance that up on each case. This is a firm in principle matter. And in a district where we have 80% Greenbelt and we're talking about appropriate development versus inappropriate development because there is no fallback here, that's very relevant to the decision-making powers that this committee has and as officers under delegated approval. Also, I think it's fair to say that the situation that the applicants find themselves in is incredibly unfortunate, and we're not sitting here not mindful and open to that situation. It wasn't through their own doing that they found themselves in this position. That doesn't change the planning merits of the fact that there is now no fallback. And I think it's a very important part that when we assess this through national policy needs to be considered when we're moving it forward. In answer to your first question, sorry, Councillor, I've done that in reverse. Yes, obviously conditions would have been suggested as part of the original approval, and they could carry forward should they be minded to you guys be minded to approve it tonight. But the in-principle issue that we're dealing with here cannot be understated. It's really important that that lands with members this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I just wanted to make just one point. Clearly, we've actually heard, from the speaker and also in the report that there is a lack of objections. However, the decision maker in relation to Greenbelt matters has to actually consider, well, what are the special circumstances that actually exist here which allow the decision maker to grant permission? And in my view, the lack of objections in relation to this particular matter does not constitute special circumstances.
Thank you, Polly. Yes, I'll follow this. So did you want to come back on that? Councillor Perry.
Just a couple of points. The Heritage Officer might have his views on this, but it's the planning us here that make the decision. And whilst I accept his outcome from it, 4.2.20, it reads a lot in the report there about the different things that they are going to be using that changes the scene altogether on this application, particularly now the wall's gone. Okay, they may have kept it, but it's not going to build that kind of establishment, what bricks were on that wall, in my opinion. So I think, I'll wait and see what other people have got to say before I make a decision on my decision anyway. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to Councillor Perry. Helen?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on that through you, Chair. It's a really important point that you've just raised there, Councillor Perry. In terms of the reuse of the bricks, yes, the bricks are on site. We don't know for certain the quality of those and how many could be reused. Now, that could be all of them. It could be very few of them. We don't have that ability to make that assessment. But in terms of the heritage, which has been discussed a lot this evening so far, there's no specific designation on this. It's not a locally listed building. We've got the wider designation, which must be considered, obviously, but on the building itself that was formerly there and has now been demolished, there's no specific designation. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Chair.
Just come back, Chairman, please.
Thank you. And then Councillor Perry.
Thank you. 4.2.20. I mean, there's the garden area. It's huge, apparently, and it's going to be covered. You've got roof lights. That paragraph needs to be read by members if you haven't already read it. I'm sure you have. Again, to absorb what's in that paragraph there. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Perry. Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just struggling to understand why the building came down in the first place, given all the constraints that the owners are in now. Could you unpack that a little bit for us, please?
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Helen.
Don't have a whole detail of information. All I know is that the conversion was approved for the building to get converted. There was then a discharge of conditions on that application, and at that point a visit was made by the case officer, which is pretty standard practice, and the building was found not to be there. If you've got approval for a conversion, you can't convert something that's not there, so therefore that planning permission becomes null and void. So we didn't deal with the discharge of condition. It was followed up then by the application that we've now got before us. But I understand there were some matters that happened on site and the building came down. It's my understanding that was not through the will of the applicants and that wasn't their doing. It doesn't change the fabric of that situation though, however, from a planning merit, as sympathetic as I am with that situation. Planning merits of the site, we have to take it on face value. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Councillor Boyce.
I appreciate the historic arguments that were made. Is there a route for this applicant to potentially restore back to the original designs, not a change of use or anything like that, but back to the original kind of shell, and then at a later date then make an application for that building to be converted again? Is that a route?
Helen?
No, not particularly. I mean, some of the harm that we've talked about this evening, as you can see from that photo, is because it's a building site really. Works were cleared, through whatever reason, and that's what we're dealing with now. The loss of the wall, but the boundary wall has a very negative impact. I don't think there'd be any argument about that. I don't think there'd be any concerns in terms of reinstating that. So you would at least be able to kind of complete that edge as it was historically, through planning permission or otherwise. It's when we start to talk about the new building and that the presence of that structure in the green belt where we become a problem. But no, I don't think there's any way that could be reinstated to what it was and then a conversion. So we've gone full circle. That's what you're referring to. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Boyce, you okay with that? Thank you. Councillor Ashley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if there's a photograph or illustration of the building for which planning permission was given and the state of it at the time, so we can make a comparison in some way. Was it very substantial? Oh, I see it on the right at the top. Yeah, so it looks a fairly substantial building. But no roof, is that right?
Tom, you okay to fill that one?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, pretty much what you can see there is what remained of it. So there was no roof. There were the side walls. There weren't any walls on the other side that you can't see, but it was traditionally open anyway. There were brick piers on the other side. So apart from the roof and parts of the wall, parts of it crumbling a little bit, it was relatively intact. Yeah.
Councillor Ashley, did that answer your question? Members, any other member want to ask any questions, make some observations? Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. My point is that we have to treat each case by its own merits and not take on the issue of the NFPP. We bring those into the case in question. That is one point I want to raise. As to the scenario on this, I want to throw forward is on that building, if a storm would blow them walls down, would that planning application be classed as null and void then on that scenario?
Helen, do you want to come back on
Yeah,
that?
if you grant planning permission for the conversion of a building and then the building is not there to convert, then yes, you can't implement that planning permission because the structure that gave you the fallback for the consent in the first place no longer exists. So depending on whatever scenario resulted in there being no building, I think it's unlikely that storm damage, for example, would result in the kind of the flattening of a building to the degree that you've got there. But I'll take the principle, yes, but it's hard to implement a consent of something that is a conversion that therefore no longer exists. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kelly, is that answer your question?
Can I come back on that, Chair?
Which can you?
The question is the roof is on a building, the main structure that holds the apexes together, and if that isn't there to support the main structure, then any of those walls could have come down during the first stage, which could have then they gone, it's all unsafe, we need to take it down.
Sorry, I wasn't very clear. When you are assessing a planning application for conversion of a building exactly like this, it had to be appropriate development in the Greenbelt, it have to be demonstrated that it's of substantial, it's capable of conversion. So that was undertaken by way of structural survey for the first application. So if it was minded to come down in the next storm, it's unlikely that structural survey would have given it a thumbs up for a conversion. So that therefore then allows us to use that fallback and say, yes, we can approve it. So the structural stability of that has to be demonstrated and was in the first application. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
And to address the comments about the precedent, that was an answer to a direct question, and you're quite right that each case is studied to take on its own merits. Councillor Ashley, is it Councillor Ashley or Councillor Burnett? Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. Can you tell us how long the previous building had been in the state that it had been, without a roof, disused, etc.? Thank you.
We don't know for sure. Just looking at Google Street View, the roof was on in 2009, but there are no photos between then and now. So some point between those two dates, although I'm sure as I know.
Okay, Councillor Burnett. Any other members want to make any observations or comments? Councillor Hazeltine.
It's just a comment, really. I think this case highlights that you should always ask for advice and correct permissions before you go further. If that had been done, probably we wouldn't have been in this position today.
Thank you, Councillor Hazeltine. Very wise comments. Members, any other observations, questions? Councillor Ashley.
Thank you. This particular application, because examining it, we've heard from the planning officers as well. On the bottom of page 15, 4.2.17, just the first sentence really, with regard to the first point above, the previous approval cannot now be implemented as it was for conversion of a building that no longer exists. So that I think is an important point, Mr. Chairman, that we should take into account. And at the bottom of page 16, 4.2.22, this is the inspector's comments concerning the fact that he gave approval for planning permission for the original building. And all his comments are concerned with regards to the fact that the building that was standing at that time was capable of being converted into a dwelling for normal living. And the fact that the dwelling has got that means that the inspector's comments now are irrelevant because the building is not there. I wonder, Mr. Chairman, if I can also add to this one. In my patch some years ago, we had a redundant farmhouse, quite a substantial building. And the owner demolished the building completely and then applied for planning permission to put a substantial domestic dwelling on. It was refused on exactly the same grounds that we're talking here, that the site in effect had been returned to the green belt. Now I think the danger is tonight, if we actually approve this and go against the officer's recommendations, I wonder if we are opening doors to future applications where they can say, okay, we've got planning permission on a structure and then get rid of the lot and develop it, because we've given permission on this. Then I think we've got problems, Mr. Chairman, in the future concerning similar type applications to this, and we will get them. So I don't like the comments that it could be given permission for special reasons, if you like. But that's my opinion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ashley, for that eloquent summary. Helen, do you want to come back on anything there? Sorry. Members, anybody else? Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not unknown for this committee to go against officers' recommendations. We do have to show good planning reasons and very special circumstances. So far, I haven't heard any. It's my own opinion. So I'm waiting to hear some plain reasons that will stand up to go against the officer's recommendation. So anybody who's wants to go against the officer's recommendations need to speak now.
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Councillor Perry.
I think you should put the case forward. Enough's been said.
Yeah, I'm just making sure that anybody else has got any comments or observations. Councillors, members. Okay, thank you, members. I'll just clean up a couple of technical issues with Pardeep. Thank you, Councillor Perry. Yeah, members, I'm going to put the matter to vote now, and the vote is to go along with the officer's recommendations and refuse the application. So repeat that, the vote is to refuse the application. Those in favour? Refused application. Okay, yeah, thank you, members. And is anybody voting against that that vote? Councillor Davis, Councillor Gilly? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you, members. The vote is to go along with the officer's recommendations and to refuse the application. Thank you very much for that well-informed debate. We'll now move on to the second application, which is application number 240024/4. Helen, is this you?
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks approval for railings and CCTV to improve security at the Sailing Club located within Himley Park and Gardens. I'll show you the location. So the red line there shows the location of the Sailing Club within Himley Hall Park and Gardens. The application is before Planning Committee as it is contrary to Greenbelt policy. The proposed fencing would enclose the perimeter of the existing boat park and 5 CCTV posts would be installed. So this slide gives you an indication of the nature of the fencing that would be installed at the site, and also an example of the style of pole that would be located to house the CCTV. The development proposal is not noted as one of the exceptions in the NPPF when it comes to Greenbelt policy, and as such it represents inappropriate development. So therefore we need to see very special circumstances being demonstrated. In this case, the design of the proposed fence is not considered to have a material impact on the openness of the Greenbelt because of its design, as you can see there. And evidence of issues of theft at the site have been clearly demonstrated to officers. West Midlands Police have actually, Staffordshire Police have actually commented on the application, stating this is necessary because of some of the thefts that have gone on locally. As such, very special circumstances are considered to have been advanced and do outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt, albeit on balance. The site itself is located in a conservation area and within the Grade 2 registered park and garden. The boat facility is, however, well established and has altered the edge of the lake over time. Given this, as well as the evidence of the theft being an issue, subject to a landscaping scheme, the council's senior conservation officer has raised no objections to the proposed development. The landscaping scheme has also been reviewed by the council's ecologist and the tree officer, and no objections have been received. Suitably worded conditions are proposed to secure the landscaping as appropriate to this development going forward. So by way of context, this is the area around the lake, which is used for boating. You can see there on the left-hand side where the boats are stored, and on the right-hand side, the temporary Harris fencing that's been installed for security purposes. And this view again across to the boat storage area, you can just about see the Harris fencing there on the left-hand side, and then a view to the lake from the further distance. So given all of the above, approval is recommended on this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ellen. Then I call upon Mr. Alan Dean now to speak in favour of the application. Mr. Dean. Sir, as the previous application, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. I'm Alan Dean from the Himley Hall Sailing Club. I would like to say that we realise that it's a privilege to sail at Himley Hall, but it has presented some challenge in regard to security over the years. 2 years ago, we had our engine stolen again, and then in the summer of that year, we had a boat stolen, and then 14 boats smashed in one night with a heavy hammer, costing thousands of pounds to mend. To some extent, we are still reeling from all of that. Not all boats are mended, and insurance costs have risen considerably. We have redoubled our security, and the railings will provide the necessary improvements in the boat park specifically to allow us to maintain activities. All this would not have saved our starter's hut destroyed by fire at Christmas through another act of vandalism. So it continues. Last year, in addition to our normal sailing and training, we provided water activities for 180 local scouts and local youngsters, which we're in the process of repeating this year, and also providing formal training, which we hope will lead to a youth squad. So we are a very in-demand local amenity, which we have developed despite the problems over the last 50 years. The report you have before you presents a very detailed and accurate picture of all the issues, and I would like to thank the officers for their advice and assistance in this matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Members, you've heard the presentation, and we've heard Mr. Dean speak in favour of the application. Members, just open to yourself. Any questions, observations or comments? Councillor Harbour.
Thank you, Chair. I'm minded to accept the application on the basis of like the historic crime. Just one thing to note from a previous application, we talked about continuity in terms of decisions that this council has made and setting precedent. I think I remember an application in my ward was very similar. It was a site that was looking to be secured in the green belt. There was potential harm to the green belt, and there were mitigations put in place. The mitigations were that the railings were going to be painted green. These are going to be black. So I don't know if that's something that the officers are considered as a condition potentially.
Helen, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you. Black or green, as long as it's a darker colour, you don't have the kind of stark impact. I think the important thing about this particular application is the planting scheme that's going around it. So there's quite an extensive landscaping scheme that's going to look to soften the impact and the linear impact of the fence itself. So whilst it will take a year or two to establish, once that has established, I'm not sure the railings in terms of their finished colour would be that relevant. Black or dark green tend to be the preferred option, but if members were minded to want to go for green, it wouldn't be a problem. But you'll find that there's very little difference in terms of impact once the planting scheme's gone in. Thank you.
Councillor Boyce, okay. Members, any other member want to make any observations or make a comment? Okay, so we'll move straight to vote then, and the vote is to approve the application in line with the officer's recommendation. So we'll repeat, it's to approve the application. Officers, members in favour? Against? And any abstentions? Okay, members, so that application has been approved. Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the report of the lead planning officer, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Just by way of monthly update then, members, as is regular at the committee, just wanted to point out a few procedural changes. The main one being that we are looking to increase the fees for pre-application service going forward as of the beginning of June. There is an increase appended to the report that I've provided you. It's a minimal increase in the vast majority of cases, just in line with general uplift, and we have tidied up some of the fees in terms of representing the central government set fees, of which there was an increase in December. So that's reflective of that. What we have found is our development team meeting process has become very popular, and we're getting very, very positive feedback from developers with that in that regard. So there is an additional charge being placed in that because the demand on officer time has substantially increased from when that was first brought in. So that's something that we really wanted to flag with you this evening. We're continuing to make progress with our workflow system and bringing in new systems. And the DLUC grant that we were awarded, we're looking to appoint a 2-year fixed term contract to that. I actually interviewed for that yesterday and that's looking positive, so I'll update on that next month. In terms of training, we are looking to do training in June, which will be trees and arboriculture, and then training in August, which will be on planning conditions. Myself and Pardic would looking to deliver that. By way of appeals, nothing too much to report in terms of the inspectorate's appeal decisions over the last month. The one really that I wanted to raise with you was the Teddesley Road site in Penkridge. So this was the site that we, as an authority, challenged the decision to. It's now been reheard by the planning inspectorate. And whilst it was allowed, there was a personal permission put in place. So we consider that to be a benefit from where we were previously. What's of merit and really to kind of understand on a member's side is that very significant weight was given to the shortfall in the ability to make a 5-year supply for Gypsy Traveller sites. Other to that, performance is going well, as you'll see from the table at the rear of the report. Monthly performance continues to increase month on month, and it's starting to show now in the quarterly reports out of DLUC every quarter. That's it for me though, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then members, any questions for Helen? Councillor Kelly.
On the Teddesley appeal, there is a lot of conditions set out on that. If the conditions aren't met within a timely manner, is enforcement going to be employed at a reasonable or a strict procedure?
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Helen?
Excellent question and very observant. The conditions are incredibly tight that the inspectors put on. And I will go as far as to say our normal enforcement procedures, as you're all aware, is we wait for reports of a breach to be notified to the service. It won't be the case in this one. There's active monitoring going on with this one because there's two key fundamentals, especially about connections, are really important and were fundamental to the decision that was made. So it will be actively monitored going forward, rest assured. Thank you.
Councillor Kay, you happy with that? Members, any other questions for Helen? Okay, members, that's it. So it just remains for me to close the meeting at 19:20. And thank you all for your attendance and the well-informed debate, particularly on the first application, and have a safe journey home.